down the lineage from epigenetics and genetics, we bring forth into this awareness when we are first into this life force, that we decode and uncode the codons within the genes that make up us in the physical or organs, the way they function, the way we function, and the variations that make up who we are, passed down from our lineage, is these little details that now are coming up, and in these details we find that certain enzymes might not be as readily available to us to consume the various foods, and what foods we must start removing from our diets to best evolve, and the certain connections we have with our mind, body, and spirit, and emotional body to this thing called soul that we are brought in with our life force. And so I wanted to touch on this a little bit before we get into exactly what it is that I was speaking about, and to keep in mind these things called enzymes and various hormones and the metabolic system, and all these play a factor in the variations of this discussion here.
Right. I would like to discuss the topic of transfiguration and disfiguration and adaptation, and pretty much when we evolve in a certain way, that the environment or the world we live in as a collective hasn't, or in a planetary kind of alignment way, however it goes, hasn't quite caught up. And you find these disfigurations and these distortions that do exist, that we have to, when we transcend in some ways, and we have to come back down and ground and to this reality. So what we have is a transformation, obviously, because transformation has to do with spiritual and physical. That's what transformation of the physical and the metaphysical, right? So when we transmute, we're doing it on an emotional level of that energy, because we are all energy, and that's what it is. And so if we're like, mostly our souls are in the solar plexus, okay, and lower, like as we started, in the patriarchy, which I think that for some reason, for me, my soul dates back to further where there was perhaps a matriarchy before. Something must have happened. I don't know, even though people are saying, or whatever mythology is saying, I mean, to pick it up the pieces of a broken world and make sense of it in a way it doesn't. But when we connect the dots and with our own, information that we uncode or decode from our codons, and, our DNA, and so we figure it out in some ways, however deep we can go and access. And so this thing that must have happened, whatever happened, now ended up becoming a patriarchal world. And a lot of the things that is off balance for us to adapt, instead of evolving, or however it is our codes are informing us to be in this form, the physical, and be able to be in balance, in alignment, in harmony, in a relationship with the external world, is this thing. And we end up, I keep saying end up in all these words, it's okay, it's my way of interpreting these things. And so the energy that gets trapped and stuck into the physical body in a way that, okay, we can transfigure to adapt, or we can disfigurements, okay? And so what happens is, for me, it's a little bit, depending on it's either emotional, it's physical, right? The mental, of course. I'm not saying it in any particular order, it's just coming. and then, this is our soul. So when our soul starts off, in order for it to expand so that we can bring in more light, these things happen. If we bring in more light and the soul's not expanded enough, we end up with disfiguring instead of transfiguring, being able to transfigure our world in such a way, because what's inside is also outside. And, I don't know if I should be going into an sample or example. We end up into collisions sometimes, like really collisions, and that's how we can bond in things and to figure things out, and accidents and other disfigurements. So for me, it was cracking my skull, just a little bit, hairline fracture in, the forehead, where the third eye is supposed to be. Just barely missed it, just more towards the right. And it goes all the way, now it's cracked, all the way to the far back, right? Closer to the occipital area, but not that far low, and we're talking about the crown area. And so it goes from one side on an angle to another. And so this is something that karmically happened to me, but it's okay. It's not that bad. I mean, it's not as bad as that the medical system would say there's something wrong. But on other levels, like the spiritual or it has opened things up for me at a very young age. This happened in 1988. In any event, this isn't the thing. That's one way of, yes, okay, so it must be one example. The other ones are when you get, energy that's trapped, or however you want to put it. I find that from what I'm looking at, a lot of women from the waist down are overweight. And could it be a patriarchal dysfunction of not able to, because of perhaps their soul and the information why they're here, and things that we can't all adapt into that patriarchal society or whatever that world is, that's very fixed and very disfiguring in some ways. That, okay, I mean, evolution has it that, as we evolve, we might not need certain body parts. Like our appendix, like our tonsils, and then even the gallbladder and other such things. But that's due to levels of perhaps even not having enough oxygen. Where here's where the theory lies, is when we can't expand our soul in this way to be able to expand it, our soul still ends up into those lower areas from the solar plexus, just below the heart, all the way to, where it starts, from our birth, from a navel area, right? And so we cannot expand it upward. When we cannot expand it upward, how do we expect the light to do this? So when we transcend, meaning that upward, to expand the soul, how is the spirit supposed to be able to transcend within the body? And, I'm not saying that outside is, for the most part. And when we do that, our brain, which I'm going back to that accident or incident with the hairline fracture, goes to show that the mind, or the spirit, or the soul, whatever codons, whatever that DNA, that information, that monad, that field that we are decoding and creating our world with is not inside our brain or our senses. It's beyond that, and we're interpreting it in, by doing neuroplasticity and patterning and doing these things to create channels that fire up within our brains and communicate with the synapses within our brains. These little fires, sparks. That's our spirit. That's the consciousness. That's the thing that light, that force, that will, that chi, prana, that takes both. The soul has to be there, expanded, in order to be able to accept that light, the more light. And so, so we're calling it plasma, right? And the plasma can take that and expand in frequency. So here we are. And my sample here about this brain thing, that is all this information and how our mind works, the body, the mind body, okay, so let's call them bodies, is on the outside and on the inside, of course, but it's not like this is our brain. So this is what I've noticed, that we can actually function even if we have skull injuries and things, and it's not, well, of course now I've been giving my vulnerable things that if you want to kill me, you could perhaps do, I have my sensitive areas, and that's one perhaps. And so, yeah, and from the lower aspects, why women are overweight, mother-bearing hips, all these things, that there's a lot of energy that isn't able to work itself through there, and we end up looking like overweight in those areas. And that can be also due to this variation, because we all have our little differences, but then we all can connect in certain ways, in these ways to better understand that it's not just one thing of the right food we eat, because then on the outside too, we might, when we're totally connected to our bodies, and you find that when you have a good physical workout and you go to the gym and things and you're working and you're channeling that energy, like for instance, I might not be doing, even though I can crave going on a bicycle or having sex with a partner or things like that, which we make up for in other ways. Anyway, or swimming, I love swimming. So when you can connect to the physical body in this way, and that lower aspect, for me it is, especially the root chakra, and as far as I'm noticing here with fat, that's letting me know the adipose tissue that's collecting the toxins and keeping them there in my nervous system. And so also the sacral, and a little bit on the solar, but not so much. And so I'm noticing these things, and it has to do with perhaps even when you're connected, then you still have that patriarchal dealings that you're dealing with, that perhaps it might be poverty, perhaps it might be food banks, perhaps it might be not having the time because you're too enslaved with other doing. And so what happens is, or you have society saying, okay, now you can't have lettuce or you can't have this because of inflation, and it's all a big business, instead of caring for each other and making this world work as we would have in a matriarchal society. We have to kind of be more oppressive and controlling. So that's the patriarchy, and we have to, in order to adapt, we end up with disfigurements, what appears like disfigurements, but they're just only signs saying this is where this work needs to be done. So it's not just through nutrition, okay? It's like all four bodies, if you really want to look at it in that way. And the relationship and our world as a collective, and how we have to adapt or disfigure in that sense, in that world. Now, if we choose and we can't be in that world. Eventually, the world that we can be in will be there, and we have to do a lot of work internally for that to happen. So when we do that, we can start transfiguring, shifting, meaning shape-shifting into the way, because look, the transformation that's how it begins with the physical. And I've already written a book called The Silver and Light, A Course in Metaphysical Spirituality. And it might not be exactly like, the hermetic way of, hey, I realized that I had to be a hermit for the most part, because spiritual teachers, in order to find that, and it's a discipline, okay? And it's not something that we all choose to do. It kind of chooses us, in a sense that, well, for me, it was mostly to do with me being, my sexual preferences and the way society has shunned people like that. And so they have no choice but to kind of turn inwardly and find that spiritual connection. So this is what happens. And so it's a, so for the most part, for me to find a partner to be with, or a twin flame like you would call it, they would have to have done already the spiritual work. Or we can be like these spiritual teachers, like all of us who are just doing business, and realize, so that we can work that part of ourselves, so that we can have that balance. Or we find it in a partner who's already, in that ego-driven world, really successful, but at the same time lacking that internal spiritual work they haven't done. So I thought that that's possible, and maybe, we can do that and we can connect, but that hasn't worked for me either. So so here I am with you guys here talking, and I thought maybe it's best that I leave it at this. And if there's anything else I need to speak of, please pick up my book. It's Barnes & Noble. Every retail that you could find, it might be a little bit disinformation or whatever when it's out there, and you might see it, that, but it has a lot of information when you do buy it, and I'm not making that much money off of it, hardly anything. The whole idea is to get us as a collective moving forward, so that I can too be a better part, integral with you guys all, and be able to live in that world with you guys, in that world that we all belong to be in. When we wake up and enlighten ourselves and become responsible beings and loving and caring, leaving the ego behind. Or integrating it in a sense, right? But, going with the higher heart consciousness, and living in that world that I want all of us to kind of, the more the merrier. So, many blessings, and this is Maria, and I'm just going to give you that signing out, and much love and much light, and till next time, bye-bye.